Imagine finding out your entire family is going on a Christmas trip. Without you. No invite, no explanation, just gone. And the worst part? It was all my sister's doing. That's when I knew. This was the last time I'd let them treat me like this. One chilly December morning, I woke up to the sound of suitcases being dragged across the floor and muffled excitement echoing from the living room. Only to find out my entire family was heading out on a Christmas trip. Without me. No invite, no explanation. Just a few awkward glances as they shuffled out the door, leaving me stunned and alone in my pajamas, clutching a half-empty mug of coffee, like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. The realization hit harder when I discovered it was all orchestrated by my sister, the golden child who had apparently convinced everyone that I wouldn't enjoy it, or that I'd prefer some quiet time alone. And in that moment, something in me snapped. Years of being the afterthought, the outsider, the one left out of their laughter and plans, all came rushing to the surface, and I knew, standing in the eerie stillness of the empty house, that this would be the last time I'd let them treat me like this. I didn't know how or when, but one thing was certain. The next time they looked for me, I'd be long gone, chasing my own version of joy far away from their shallow, self-serving world. As the sound of the car engine faded into the distance, I sat on the couch, staring at the blinking Christmas lights on the tree, their glow feeling cold and hollow. A mockery of the warmth this season was supposed to bring. I couldn't help but replay every little moment where I'd been overlooked. Forgotten birthdays, inside jokes I was never part of, trips where my name was an afterthought on the invite list, if it even made it there at all. But this was the tipping point. My sister had gone too far this time, and the betrayal burned in my chest like a fire I couldn't extinguish. For hours, I let the bitterness swirl, imagining all the ways I could confront them, make them see what they'd done, make them feel the isolation they'd inflicted on me. But then, as the snow began to fall softly outside, something shifted. Sitting there in that heavy silence, I realized I didn't need their approval, their half-hearted apologies, or even their company. This was my life, my holiday, and I wasn't going to let their absence ruin it. I grabbed my coat, boots, and the little money I'd saved up, determined to create my own Christmas, one they couldn't take away. Maybe I'd head to that cozy little cabin I'd always dreamed of renting, or spend the night skating at the rink downtown, surrounded by strangers, but feeling more at home than I ever did with my family. Whatever I did, it would be for me. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of freedom, small but growing, flicker inside me. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something better. And as I stepped out into the crisp night air, I smiled, knowing I didn't need anyone else to make this Christmas unforgettable. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked down the dimly lit street, each step feeling lighter, as if shedding the weight of years of resentment and hurt. I didn't have a plan, but that didn't matter. Freedom didn't require a roadmap. I passed houses glowing with Christmas lights, the muffled laughter of families drifting through frosted windows, and instead of feeling envy or longing, I felt peace. For once, I wasn't trying to force myself into a picture where I didn't belong. As I reached the town square, the air smelled of roasted chestnuts and hot chocolate, and the faint sound of a street musician's violin floated through the night. I stopped at a small stall selling handmade ornaments, drawn to a tiny glass snowflake that sparkled like magic in the light. It felt symbolic, fragile yet beautiful, unique in its imperfection. So I bought it, tucking it carefully into my pocket, as if it were the start of something meaningful. From there, I found myself at the skating rink, a place I hadn't visited since I was a kid. The rink was busy, full of people gliding, laughing and stumbling, their joy infectious. I rented a pair of skates and stepped onto the ice, wobbly at first, but soon finding my rhythm. For a moment, it felt like I'd stepped into a snow globe, the world outside fading away as I spun and slid under the twinkling fairy lights. I laughed out loud when I nearly fell, catching myself just in time, and realized it was the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. This was Christmas, this feeling of being alive, of creating something beautiful out of nothing, of knowing that even if I was alone, I wasn't lonely. After skating until my legs ached, I treated myself to a steaming cup of hot chocolate, sitting on a bench as snowflakes melted on my cheeks. I thought about my family, where they might be, whether they'd even noticed I wasn't there. But the sting of it had dulled. They'd made their choice, and now I was making mine. I didn't need to chase their approval anymore. I didn't need their half-hearted invitations, or my sister's manipulations to define me. This was my life, and I was done waiting for them to see my worth. By the time I returned home, the little house felt different, cozier, warmer, as if it had been waiting for me to claim it. I hung the glass snowflake on the tree, its sparkle catching the light just right, and sat down by the window to watch the snow fall. Maybe I'd send my family a message tomorrow, maybe I wouldn't. But tonight this was my Christmas, and for the first time, it felt like enough. As I sat by the window, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the heater, I thought about what this new chapter might look like. The idea of spending Christmas alone had always seemed like a tragedy, something to be pitied. But tonight, it felt like a triumph. The world outside was still, blanketed in snow. But inside my mind, plans were forming. I could make this my tradition. An annual escape from the expectations and chaos that came with family. Maybe next year, I'd travel somewhere new. A snowy cabin in the mountains or a bustling Christmas market in a city I'd never been to. Or maybe I'd spend it volunteering, surrounded by people who understood that love and connection didn't have to come with strings attached. For now, though, I decided to make the most of this quiet evening. I lit a few candles, their soft glow filling the room with warmth, and rummaged through the kitchen for ingredients to bake something sweet. I found a recipe for gingerbread cookies in an old cookbook, and got to work, flour dusting the counters, and the smell of cinnamon and cloves seemed filling the air. As I shaped the dough into little stars and trees, I felt a strange kind of joy, not the kind that comes from grand gestures or perfect moments, but the quiet, steady kind that sneaks up on you when you're fully present. When the cookies were done, I piled them onto a plate, grabbed a blanket, and curled up on the couch to watch an old Christmas movie I hadn't seen in years. The characters on the screen laughed and sang, their joy infectious. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about who wasn't there or what was missing. I was here in this moment, and it was enough. As the night wore on, I realized that the bitterness I'd been carrying for so long was starting to melt away, replaced by something softer. I didn't forgive my family. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I didn't need to. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me, about learning to give myself the love and care I'd been waiting for from others. It was about building a life that felt full and rich, even if it didn't look like the glossy version of Christmas plastered on postcards. By the time I climbed into bed, the snow outside was falling heavier, the world quiet and peaceful. I thought about tomorrow, about what it might bring. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. My family could have their trip, their perfect little bubble without me. I didn't need to fit into their story anymore. I was writing my own, and it was going to be beautiful in a way they might never understand. And as I drifted off to sleep, the glass snowflake catching the moonlight from the tree, I smiled, knowing that this Christmas, this messy, imperfect, unexpected Christmas was mine. The next morning, I woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, the snow outside piled thick on the windowsill. It was the kind of morning that felt like a clean slate, where everything seemed quiet and untouched, waiting for something new to begin. For a brief moment, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, debating whether I should check my phone. Maybe there'd be a message from my family, a half-hearted apology, or an awkward, "hope you're doing okay" text. But when I finally reached for it, the screen was empty. No missed calls, no messages. Instead of feeling hurt, though, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't need their words to validate me anymore. Today, I was going to move forward with or without them. After breakfast, I bundled up in my warmest coat and stepped outside into the crisp air. The world looked magical, the snow glistening like diamonds under the sunlight. I decided to take a walk, letting my boots carve fresh paths into the untouched whiteness. The stillness felt sacred, almost like the universe was telling me it was okay to take my time, to figure out what I wanted from this new version of my life. I walked past houses decorated with wreaths and strings of lights, past the little park where children were already building snowmen and throwing snowballs, their laughter carrying on the wind. For once, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I was part of the world, even if it was a quiet, solitary part, and that was enough. As I wandered, I stumbled upon a small cafe tucked into the corner of the street, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside. Something about it drew me in, so I pushed open the door, the bell above jingling softly. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon hit me immediately, wrapping around me like a hug. I ordered a hot drink and found a seat by the window, watching the snow fall and people pass by as I sipped. The cafe was cozy, filled with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of cups and saucers. I took out a notebook I'd brought with me and began to write. Not anything specific, just thoughts, ideas, dreams I hadn't let myself consider until now. The act of writing felt like opening a door I'd kept shut for years. And as the words spilled onto the page, I realized there was so much I wanted to do, so much I'd been holding myself back from. I wrote about the places I wanted to visit, the things I wanted to try, the kind of person I wanted to become. Somewhere in the middle of it all, I wrote something that stuck with me. I deserve joy just as I am. It was simple, but it felt revolutionary, like a truth I'd known deep down, but never dared to say out loud. When I finally left the cafe, the snow was still falling soft and steady. I felt lighter, like I'd left a part of my old self behind on that page. As I walked home, I passed by a group of carolers singing in the square, their voices bright and cheerful against the cold. I stopped to listen, letting the music fill me up. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not because of anyone else, but because I'd chosen it for myself. That evening, I lit the candles again and turned on the Christmas lights, their glow filling the little house with warmth. I hung up a few more ornaments I'd found in a box, the ones I liked most, and realized that this tree was mine now. Not something to share or compare, but a reflection of me. I made another batch of cookies and poured myself a glass of wine, sitting down to watch the snow drift lazily past the window. There was no noise, no drama, no chaos. Just me, the quiet, and the steady realization that this Christmas might be the best one I'd ever had. Not because of grand gestures or picture-perfect moments, but because it was mine. And as the night settled in, I thought about the future, not with dread or worry, but with excitement. There was a whole world out there waiting for me. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to embrace it. Maybe my family would reach out one day, or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, I knew I'd be okay, because I was finally learning how to love myself the way I'd always wanted them to. And that, I realized, was the best gift I could have ever given myself. The days after Christmas passed like a soft blur, each one bringing a new sense of clarity and calm I hadn't known I needed. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was comforting, a blank canvas for me to fill however I wanted. I spent my mornings wrapped in a warm blanket by the window, sipping tea and jotting down ideas for things I wanted to try. Simple things, like learning how to bake bread from scratch, or taking a pottery class at the community center. In the afternoons, I'd bundle up and take long walks through the snow-covered streets, marveling at how peaceful everything felt when I wasn't rushing to meet someone else's expectations. It felt like I'd been given the gift of time. Time to think, to heal, and most importantly, to figure out what I wanted, not what anyone else thought I should want. A few days before New Year's, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed with a message from my sister. It wasn't long, just a simple, "Hey, how have you been?" For a moment, I stared at it, the emotions swirling inside me more complicated than I'd expected. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her sit with the silence the way they'd left me to sit with mine. But another part of me, one that felt new, softer, maybe even braver, wanted to respond. Not for her sake, but for mine. So I did. I kept it brief, neutral. "I'm doing well, thanks. How was your trip?" She replied quickly, telling me about where they'd gone, the things they'd done, and how different it had felt without me there. She didn't apologize, not directly anyway, but I could sense an awkwardness in her words, as if she was testing the waters to see how much I knew, or how much I cared. I didn't give her much. I wasn't ready to dive into that conversation, and honestly, I didn't feel like I owed it to her. Instead, I focused on what I could control myself. I spent New Year's Eve alone by choice, watching the fireworks from my little porch with a mug of hot cider in hand, wrapped in a thick scarf, and a sense of contentment I hadn't felt in years. When the clock struck midnight, I didn't make a long list of resolutions or promises I knew I wouldn't keep. Instead, I made one quiet vow to myself to put my happiness first. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it felt real, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes. I signed up for that pottery class and spent my Tuesday evenings getting my hands messy with clay, laughing with strangers who quickly began to feel like friends. I picked up a second-hand camera and started taking photos on my walks, capturing little moments of beauty I'd never noticed before. A bird perched on a snowy branch, the way the light hit the frost on a fence, the warm glow of a street lamp at dusk. I even redecorated my house, turning it into a space that truly felt like mine, filled with colors and textures that made me happy. And then, one evening in late January, my sister called. For a moment I hesitated, my finger hovering over the answer button, but I picked up, curious to see what she had to say. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost uncertain, and after some small talk about the weather and work, she finally said it. "I'm sorry." She admitted to planning the trip without me, brushing it off at first as a misunderstanding, but then, after a long pause, owning up to the fact that it was intentional. "I don't know why I did it," she said, her voice heavy with guilt. "Maybe I was jealous, or maybe I just didn't think about how it would feel for you. But it wasn't fair, and I'm really sorry." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand, not in a vengeful way, but in a way that reminded me of how far I'd come. I didn't need her apology to move forward. I already had. But hearing it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. I accepted her apology, but I didn't rush to reassure her or brush it off. I told her how much it had hurt, how long I'd felt invisible, and how I was done putting myself last. She really listened, and for once it felt like she understood. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, the glass snowflake catching the light on the tree I hadn't taken down yet. I thought about my family and how much I'd let their actions shape my sense of self for so long. But now that chapter was over. I was no longer the forgotten one, the outsider. I was me, whole, happy, and enough, all on my own. And as the snow fell gently outside, I smiled, ready to step into whatever came next, knowing that I was finally truly free. The weeks turned into months, and winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing patches of green. And with it, I felt my life blossoming in ways I hadn't expected. Those small steps I'd taken, pottery classes, photography, redecorating my space, had grown into something bigger, something meaningful. My pottery instructor invited me to join a local art fair, where I nervously displayed a few of my clumsy but heartfelt creations. To my surprise, people stopped to admire them, even bought a few, and for the first time in years I felt proud, not of being good at something but of trying something new, of taking a risk and putting myself out there. My photography hobby turned into a full-blown passion. I started spending entire afternoons wandering through parks and alleyways, snapping pictures of blooming flowers, sunlight filtering through trees, or the laughter of strangers enjoying the warmth of spring. One day, I submitted a few photos to a community exhibit, never expecting much, and was shocked to learn they'd been accepted. Standing in the gallery during the opening night, surrounded by others who appreciated my work, I realized I was creating a life that felt authentic, full of beauty and connection, even if it didn't look like the life I used to think I wanted. My relationship with my family was still a work in progress. My sister called more often now, her tone less sharp, more thoughtful. We never revisited the conversation about the Christmas trip, but I noticed a quiet shift in the way she treated me. She asked about my life, my interests, even came to the art fair to support me. It wasn't perfect, and I wasn't naive enough to think everything had changed, but I appreciated her effort. As for the rest of my family, things remained distant, though not cold. I sent them occasional updates, photos of my pottery, a shot of the glass snowflake still hanging in my window, but I didn't chase their approval anymore. If they wanted to be part of my life, they'd have to meet me halfway. And then, one sunny afternoon in May, I received an invitation in the mail. It was from my parents, inviting me to a family gathering for my mom's birthday. My first instinct was to say no, to protect the peace I'd built for myself. But as I held the invitation in my hands, I realized something had shifted inside me. I didn't need to avoid them anymore, didn't need to shrink away from their opinions or their potential rejection. I could go, not to seek their validation but simply to see them on my own terms. The day of the gathering I showed up wearing a bright yellow dress, a color I'd always loved but never dared to wear before. I brought a small handmade vase for my mom, filled with fresh flowers from the market. When I walked into the house, the room felt quiet for a moment, and I could feel their eyes on me, as if they didn't quite recognize this version of me. But then my mom smiled, a genuine warm smile, and hugged me tightly, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The evening wasn't perfect. There were moments of awkwardness, of old patterns trying to creep back in. But I didn't let them ruin the night. I stayed true to myself, confident and calm, and when my sister pulled me aside to quietly say, "I'm glad you came," I knew I'd made the right choice. As I drove home that night, the moon bright above me, I felt at peace. My family wasn't perfect and they might never fully understand me, but that was okay. I didn't need them to. I had my art, my passions, my little house filled with light and love. I had myself, and that was enough. The glass snowflake still hung in my window, a reminder of that first Christmas alone. The Christmas that changed everything. Every time I looked at it, I felt a quiet strength bloom inside me. A reminder that I'd built this life on my own terms, piece by piece. And as the seasons continued to change, I carried that strength with me, ready to face whatever came next. Not with fear, but with hope, knowing that I was finally truly home. As the months rolled on, I realized how much I'd grown since that lonely Christmas. It was as though the pain of being left behind had cracked me open, letting the light finally seep in. My days were fuller now, not because they were packed with people or activities, but because they were mine. Every decision I made felt like a small act of defiance against the person I used to be, the one who waited for others to decide her worth, to hand her happiness in small fleeting scraps. Summer came with its golden evenings and warm breezes, and I found myself spending more and more time outdoors. The little backyard behind my house, once overgrown and neglected, became my sanctuary. I planted wildflowers in every color I could find, their bright blooms attracting butterflies and hummingbirds that flitted in and out of the sunlight. On quiet afternoons, I'd sit there with a book or my camera, the sound of rustling leaves and chirping birds wrapping around me like a soft melody. Sometimes I'd invite a few of the friends I'd made through pottery and photography over for iced tea or a simple dinner, and we'd laugh under the fairy lights I'd strung up in the trees, sharing stories about our lives. One day, as I was photographing a bee nestled in the petals of a sunflower, I received a call from my dad. His voice was hesitant, almost unsure, as though he didn't quite know how to begin. "Your mom's been talking about that vase you made for her," he said after some small talk. "She keeps it on the kitchen table. She loves it." The words caught me off guard. He wasn't the type to comment on things like that, but they warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. He went on to ask how I was doing, not in the polite, distant way he usually did, but with genuine curiosity. We ended up talking for nearly an hour, and when I hung up, I felt something in my chest shift. Maybe the walls I'd built around myself weren't as permanent as I thought. By the time autumn arrived, I felt ready to open myself up to even more possibilities. I submitted a portfolio of my photography to a local gallery, and to my shock, they offered me a small solo exhibit. The opening night was surreal. Standing in a room filled with my work, surrounded by people who were there to see it. My sister came, along with my parents, and though they seemed slightly out of place in the crowd of artists and gallery goers, their pride was unmistakable. My mom even bought one of my framed photos, a shot of the glass snowflake hanging in my window, and insisted on hanging it in their living room. After the exhibit, my sister and I went for coffee. For the first time in what felt like forever, we talked honestly, not just about the past but about who we were now. She admitted that she'd always felt the need to compete with me, even though she couldn't explain why. "I guess I just thought you were stronger," she said, her voice quiet. "Like you didn't need us the way I did." Her words caught me off guard, but they also made me realize how much I'd grown. I didn't need to hold on to my anger anymore. I could let it go, not for her sake but for mine. As winter crept back in, I found myself looking forward to Christmas. Not with the dread or sadness I'd once felt, but with quiet excitement. This time, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to define the holiday for me. I decorated my little house early, filling it with twinkling lights, garlands, and the scent of fresh pine. I invited my family over for Christmas Eve dinner, something I never would have imagined doing a year ago. They came, tentative at first but quickly warming to the cozy atmosphere. We ate, laughed, and even exchanged small gifts. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, still some gaps that couldn't be bridged, but it felt like a start. As the night wound down and they headed home, I stood by the window, watching the snow fall softly outside. The glass snowflakes still hung there, catching the light from the tree. It felt like a symbol of everything I'd been through, everything I'd overcome. This Christmas wasn't about proving anything to anyone or trying to fit into their story. It was about celebrating the life I'd built, the person I'd become, and the joy I'd finally found within myself. And as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what came next, I was ready. The days after Christmas brought a sense of calm and clarity, as though the holiday had tied up a chapter one didn't even realize I'd been writing for so long. The quiet house, once a symbol of loneliness, now felt like a retreat, a space that was fully mine, a reflection of how far I'd come. My family had left that night with hugs and tentative smiles, promises to stay in touch more. And though I didn't cling to those promises, I welcomed them with an open but cautious heart. For the first time, I felt like I was meeting them not as the person they expected me to be, but as the person I had grown into. A person who didn't need to be invited, validated, or accepted to feel whole. As the new year dawned, I returned to the little rituals that had brought me so much joy. The backyard became a place of inspiration again. Even under the frost-covered ground, I started planning for spring, imagining new flowers, a vegetable patch, maybe even a little seating area for outdoor dinners with friends. My pottery hobby flourished, evolving from a personal outlet to something bigger. People began asking if I sold my pieces, and after much encouragement, I opened an online shop. Orders trickled in, then poured in, and soon I was packaging vases, bowls, and mugs with care, imagining them bringing warmth to homes far beyond mine. The photography, too, continued to grow. The exhibit had opened doors I hadn't anticipated. Opportunities to collaborate, invitations to showcase my work in other spaces. I found myself traveling to nearby towns, camera in hand, capturing moments that felt fleeting but deeply meaningful. The way sunlight danced on melting icicles, the laughter of strangers at a street fair, the stillness of a foggy morning. My photos were becoming a diary of sorts, a way to mark the beauty I found in every corner of this new life. Then, one day in early February, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from my sister. "Can we talk?" That was all it said, but something about the tone felt heavier than usual, as though she had something important to say. I called her that evening, curious but calm. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "For Christmas, for everything. I don't think I realized how much I'd taken you for granted until now." She went on to explain how much she admired the life I'd built for myself, how it had made her reflect on her own choices. "I've spent so much time trying to compete with you," she admitted. "But it wasn't fair. I never saw how strong you are." Her words caught me off guard, but they didn't leave me speechless. I thanked her not just for her honesty but for finally seeing me. And then I said the thing I'd been holding in for months, maybe even years. "You hurt me, and I don't think I'll ever forget that. But I've also learned that I don't need to hold on to it anymore. I'm okay now. I'm happy. And I hope you are too." It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was something close, a release, a way of letting go without losing myself. The months continued to unfold, each one bringing its own quiet joys. By the time spring arrived, my backyard was bursting with color, a testament to the patience and care I'd learned to give. Not just to the plants but to myself. My shop flourished, my photography gained recognition, and my circle of friends grew wider, filled with people who saw me for who I was and celebrated it. My family was still part of my life, though in a way that felt healthier, more balanced. We weren't perfect, but we were trying, and that was enough. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about that first Christmas, the one that had changed everything. The glass snowflakes still hung in my window, its edges catching the golden light of dusk. It had started as a symbol of loneliness, then resilience, and now it was simply a reminder. A quiet, beautiful testament to the fact that I had built something extraordinary out of what once felt like nothing. And as the stars began to emerge one by one, I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool spring air, filled with gratitude, not just for the life I'd created, but for the person I'd become. No longer defined by others, no longer waiting for anyone to invite me in. I was here whole and happy, exactly where I was meant to be. And for the first time I didn't just feel like I belonged, I knew I did. The weeks of spring rolled into summer, and with them came a steady rhythm to my days. A kind of peaceful contentment I never thought I'd experience. My pottery studio became my favorite retreat, its shelves now lined with the vibrant creations I had made. Each piece a small reflection of my growth. My photography, too, opened doors I hadn't dreamed of. One of my pictures was even selected for a national contest, and though I didn't win, the recognition felt like a victory all its own. Slowly but surely my life had taken on a shape that felt meaningful, joyful, and most importantly mine. One afternoon in late summer, as I sat in the shade of the backyard with a book and a cup of tea, my phone buzzed again with a message from my sister. This time it read, "We're planning Christmas early this year. I'd really love it if you could help." For a moment I stared at the words, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest. I thought back to that first Christmas, the one where I had felt so forgotten, so invisible. But now, reading her message, I didn't feel hurt or hesitant. I felt ready. That December, when I stepped into my parents' house for the holiday gathering, everything felt different. Not because they had changed completely, but because I had. The table was set beautifully, the tree glimmered with lights, and amidst the laughter and clinking of glasses, I realized something profound. I wasn't waiting for anyone to make me feel included anymore. I had walked in with my head held high, my heart open but protected, knowing that whatever happened, I was enough. Later that evening, my sister pulled me aside and handed me a small, carefully wrapped gift. "I saw this and thought of you," she said, her voice soft. Inside was an ornament, a delicate glass snowflake, almost identical to the one that had hung in my window all year. I held it in my hands, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I know I can't fix everything," she continued, "but I want you to know I see you now. I really do." I hugged her then, not out of obligation, but because I truly wanted to. It wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting the past. It was about choosing to move forward, about making space for something better, even if it was imperfect. That night, when I returned home, I hung the new snowflake beside the original on my tree. They caught the light together, casting tiny rainbows on the walls, and as I stood there in the quiet glow of my living room, I smiled. My journey had been long and messy, full of heartache and healing, but it had led me here, to a place of peace, strength, and love, both for myself and for the life I had built. This was no longer just a story of being left behind or finding my way. It was a story of belonging, not to anyone else but to myself. And as I climbed into bed that Christmas night, the snow softly falling outside, I knew with certainty that this was the ending I had been searching for all along. Or perhaps not an ending at all. Just the beginning of a new, brighter chapter. If this video hurt you, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to those who will understand.